Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a fantastic show for you today. It tells me to say great, but I'm feeling fantastic. Briahna, what do we have?
Well, Dr. Amesh Adalja will join to answer all our questions about the spreading monkeypox virus, especially whether the panic is truly justified. Plus, our Rising panel will weigh in on what may be the final nail in the coffin of Donald Trump and Mike Pence's alliance.
But first, entering the misinformation discourse is none other than Dr. Anthony Fauci. He spoke out against the spread of falsehoods online while delivering Princeton University's commencement address yesterday. Fauci proselytized that if something doesn't change soon, quote, then truth means nothing, integrity means nothing, and facts mean nothing.
Being in Washington has allowed me to experience firsthand the intensity of the divisiveness in our nation. What troubles me is that differences of opinion or ideology have, in certain situations, been reflected by egregious distortions of reality. Sadly, elements of our society have grown increasingly inured to a cacophony of falsehoods and lies that often stand largely unchallenged, ominously leading to an insidious acceptance of what I call the normalization of untruths. We see this happen daily with falsehoods propagated through a range of information platforms by a spectrum of people, including, sad to say, certain elected officials in positions of power.
Physician, heal thyself. About all the misinformation that has sprung from the wellspring of knowledge that is Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Yeah, it's not that he's wrong. It's that he is completely lacking in any insight about the role that he has played in that, right? I think everyone is kind of in the same boat where it's frustrating that there is this bifurcation that's happened, these very different camps that believe very different things. I think everyone is struggling to figure out how to understand what is real, no matter what your ideological perspective. I think that diagnosis, doctor, is correct. But at the end of the day, I think I don't want us to kind of participate in the bifurcation by not acknowledging that it is very difficult in the information age. And it is very difficult when there's so much partisanship that has affected people's translation of science. It is so difficult when there's so many political incentives that are driving different so-called like scientific decisions and decisions about whether or not to open up businesses or not, decisions about whether or not to distribute certain kind of masks or pay for certain kinds of vaccines and all of this, to find out what you should really do for your own personal safety. And I do find myself wishing there was some kind of good housekeeping seal of approval that could vet information, but we see how that goes with this misinformations are. And I don't know what the solution is. It's like every man is an island all of a sudden.
I also am increasingly troubled that misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, whatever you call it, seems now it is the framing that liberals, that Democrats have chosen. It is their way to understand what has happened over the last 4 years, however long it's been. And that framing is, I think, increasingly suspect. Or like the buy-in to it is tremendous. So much reporting, the whole like disinformation reporting industry now, right? They wanted to create a czar about it. It is the way liberals seem to try to understand what's happening. There's rapid spread of disinformation manufactured by hysterical right-wing people and propagated to the masses, making them, foolish and suspicious and crazy. But isn't it just entirely wrong? Like, are people more misinformed today than ever before? Like, where is I want to see some science or some polling on that. Like, people have been misinformed about policy and politics and basic questions of expertise.
I don't know
forever.
That it's anything other than, and I think I was talking about this last week, the role that social media is playing and the fact that people have all had all kinds of opinions and takes throughout human history,
right.
But chiseling it into my little rock tablet and spreading it on Reddit have two different kind of valences and levels of effect. I also while I completely agree that it's a weird framing that liberals have taken that like politicizes the idea of misinformation in a way that is out of step with the fact that it's always existed, it is the flip side of, I think, what conservatives do, which is the kind of conspiratorial, they're lying to us, right? One side says, you know, there are people who don't believe the authoritative facts coming down on the high, and the other side that says, I can't believe the authoritative facts or anything that comes from the government because it's Pizzagate or QAnon or these other kinds of less serious or less extreme kinds of untruths. And I don't know how to bridge that gap. I will also say that the vast majority of people, I think, are somewhere in the middle and not quite as suspicious and distrustful of things. I think that most people still open the New York Times or Washington Post or whatever your rag of choice is and trust it. But I do think that part of what the appetite is for shows like this with people with multiple opinions talking to each other is that no one knows what the truth is, so they might as well have two people with different ideas hash it out and get some sense of truthiness from the vibe between them and who just seems more credible on their face.
But it just seems like a bad way to understand what's happening. It's not because, you know, speaking for the Democrats, it's not because the policies we're offering are not what the people want, or we've, you know, lost sense of who our voters are, or we speak to them using a new cultural vocabulary that, you know, elite college grad students came up with that everyone hates. It can't be any of these things the reason we're losing. We're losing because the people are being like hypnotized. Yes. By you know, an old school guy with the pendulum or something.
Well, and Russia was the biggest boogeyman in that regard, and I think it's really to the detriment of the Democratic Party to refuse to acknowledge and take any accountability for its own personal feelings over time. There is no reason it needs to be losing, but to the extent that it engages in any of the misinformation campaign, it's just to stir the pot and make it worse. And again, never reflect on all of the things it has gotten wrong.
And those people end up, the people most obsessed with the kind of misinformation, most involved in the misinformation reporting industry end up sounding like conspiracy theorists themselves, because that's how they're connecting all the dots. So this is why everything's happening, because this tweet went viral, harassment campaigns, that's all there is.
Right.
It's like, no.
Right.
Meanwhile, former Trump advisor Kellyanne Conway called out Dr. Fauci in her new memoir, accusing the White House science advisor of foregoing masks while in private. Conway allegedly wrote, quote, "No mask was standard fare in the White House Situation Room, where Dr. Fauci was more likely to wear Dr. Fauci socks than a mask." Surprise, surprise, surprise. Now, I mean, consider the source. It's Kellyanne Conway. But it would not surprise me at all that he was demasking in private.
Because so many people are like this. I think that so many people, you know, have non-scientific assessments of their own risk. And while I understand as a public health official the gap between what you are, you know, if you feel compelled to tell the public and what you practice in your own house might be bigger and might feel more problematic as a consequence, I don't think it's that unusual for people to not necessarily practice what you preach. What is so deeply frustrating is that there was so much moralizing around it from people who knew that they weren't doing those same kinds of behaviors in their own lives. And I also think that a lot of liberals, my observation has been there's a comfort level in demasking when people think they're around other liberals because they think that they're safe, like COVID magically is not spreading among
Because COVID only afflicts bad people, not good people. Right.
And
if you're impure, then you're vulnerable.
Well, look, I think some of it
That's how they talk about it.
Some of it is the perception that obviously if you are engaging in risk-taking behavior, the likelihood that you are going to be getting COVID and spreading COVID is higher, and that's reasonable. But there is, I think, that doesn't translate to you have no risk just because someone else is being safe. Lots of people get COVID. People who've been trying very hard and being very careful get COVID. And moralizing to the degree where you think that you're safe just because somebody voted the same way that you did and unmasking in public or unmasking at fancy functions is gross.
You're a good person, Briahna, which is why you haven't gotten it yet. I'm not a good person, which is why I think I'm due for round 2 anytime now.
I mean, I wasn't going to say it. But
no, what about, are you going to be remasking aggressively because of the monkeypox?
No, not because of I haven't stopped masking in high-risk situations. So I still mask when I go into stores and, you know, ride in Ubers and go on public transportation and things like that. And I've really enjoyed not getting any cold of any kind for about 2 years now after being a very, very sick gal usually. So why not? Why stop?
Well, we'll be talking more about monkeypox and the risks and so forth in just a minute. And we're going to tell you what's on my radar, I believe, coming up next.
Looking forward to it.